The Observer.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome. I'm John Simpson. I'm the Home Affairs editor for The Observer. I can't see any of your faces. Welcome to everyone who's watching online. Tonight on The Observer Book Club, we're tackling the most urgent issues, one of the most urgent issues of our time. We're looking at the rise of the far right, from social media hate storms to populist politics, its influence in spreading across our democracies. How do we stop it? To answer that, I'm joined by someone who's been confronting extremism head-on for decades, Nick Lowles, the founder of Hope Not Hate. Nick has spent 35 years on the front line of the struggle, from confronting hate groups on Britain's streets to tracking the online networks fueling radicalization and division. His reporting and activism have helped expose dangerous networks operating under the radar. His new book sets out a plan of action, how truth, organization, and ordinary citizens just like you and me can push back against hate. I think it's an important book, and I can't wait to get stuck in. And fall off my chair. Just so you know how this works, Nick and I will start the discussion, and about halfway through, we'll start to invite questions from you guys. So Nick.
Hi.
Welcome. Nick and I have known each other for a very long time as contacts, but we've never actually met in person before this evening. So tell me a bit about how you got into this line of work.
Yeah, can I just say, it's really weird, isn't it? There's an audience there and I can't see a single face. So I'm just kind of blindly looking out. Hopefully I'm catching someone. No, look, I mean, I think for me it was quite personal. My mum was born in Mauritius and came to Britain in 1961. I grew up in Hounslow. Well, I was born in Hounslow, West London, before moving to Shrewsbury in Shropshire when I was 8 years old. And it was quite a kind of political household, and I remember we used to watch the news together as a family. And I remember the National Front party political broadcast in 1979. I was 10 years old, and a man who I now know as John Tyndall, the leader of the National Front, had made this kind of speech about how people who weren't born in Britain were going to be sent home within 6 months of a National Front government. Now, I had no concept that how big or small they were, and they ended up getting 1.1% of the vote in the general election. But for me, it terrified me, and it kind of probably, I'd say, traumatized me. I thought my mum was going to get sent home. And for years, that, you know, and obviously growing up in the early 1980s, there was a lot of racism, a lot of street racism, a lot of racism at football. And I was always really conscious of it. You know, obviously, there were people who were in a far worse position in terms of getting abused and getting abused themselves, but it was something that lived with me. And when I got involved in politics in the mid-80s during the miners' strike, I very quickly gravitated to anti-racism and anti-fascism. And, you know, to be honest, I think 1988 I got first involved, and I've not really done anything else in my life, actually. A bit of a sad thing to say, but...
The book's called How to Defeat the Far Right. I was out on the streets recently on Whitehall when Tommy Robinson gathered about 120, 150,000 people. And a lot of the people that I was talking to, the moment those two words were used, far right, would deny that they were that. And they would almost deny it in their own terms. So they say, they have catchphrases like, we're not far right, we're not far wrong. So I guess if we're going to discuss this, we need to set the terms of the debate. What is the far right, and how has it changed over the sort of course of your work?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I mean, I think for us, the far right is a kind of broad concept. So it will take in the kind of more probably traditional kind of Nazis that you know, one imagines to some extent, but it also takes in more moderate ends as well, who, you know, and what joins them together is a kind of extreme nationalism, an othering of outsiders, a kind of authoritarianism, a kind of conspiratorial mindset. I think the difference is there are some people who want to overthrow the system, and there are some people who want to subvert the system within inside. For us, that's all still far right. So, for example, you know, whether it's Donald Trump or, you know, Nigel Farage, it's about taking over the system and in a way destroying what we would say is the kind of the pillars of a liberal society. You know, the rule of law or the independence of judges, etc., etc. And obviously, then you have the kind of, I mean, in terms of America, ICE and the deportations. But it is a broad context. When I first got involved, in a way, the far right were what they said on the tin. They were Nazis. They were skinheads. They were football hooligans. They were very violent. You knew what they were, and they were, in a way, outside of mainstream society. And there was a social cost to being involved in it, whether it's from a friendship groups, whether it's from work, whether it's from whatever. It was very hard to get involved in these things. And in a way, mainstream society rejected their kind of extremism. I think where we are now is that some things that were on the extreme 30 years ago are actually in the mainstream now. And I'll give you an example of that. So in 1999, the British National Party, they had a new leader, a man called Nick Griffin. Most people probably have heard of him. The British National Party dropped their compulsory repatriation policy because they said that they couldn't sell it even to their own supporters anymore. That Britain was a multicultural society, they didn't like it, and they wish it wasn't the case, but that was a reality that they lived, and the idea that they would create a white society was fanciful in their mind. Where you take it to today, where you have semi-mainstream politicians probably saying things that are not too dissimilar for that, and there is no social cost at all to them. So I think, you know, one of the real problems is that there's been a mainstreaming, and going back to your original point, there are people now who view what many of us would consider far-right ideas as very mainstream and very not out of the ordinary at all. And I think that while, you know, we should never cede ground to these people, we need to evolve and explain ourselves differently. So part of my book is also saying just shouting Nazi at people, shouting fascist at people, you know, isn't effective anymore. Partly because they don't perceive it themselves, and also other people don't perceive it. But, you know, the Tommy Robinson demo, I mean, what struck me was that, first of all, this was a movement to the right of Nigel Farage, pushing reform further to the right, and particularly on immigration. But from the stage, you had people calling for, you know, any non-Christian religion to be kind of swept aside in the UK. You had people talking about Muslims being, you know, being the threat to the West and should be driven out of the West. You had conspiratorial things about the Great Replacement theory. The speeches, even though none of them would say they're far right, the speeches were probably more far right than we've ever had for a very long time. And the fact that they had so many people on there was obviously quite worrying for us all.
And in the book, you make a point. I think there's a footnote where you make a differentiation between Nazi with a capital N and Nazi with a lowercase n. Yeah. What? Where's the distinction there for you? I mean, you know, just so we spell it out.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't know if this is accurate at all. This is my, or this is our explanation. When we talk about Nazis, as in German Nazis from World War II, we have a capital with that, you know. when we talk about Nazis of today, I would use a small n for that, whether that was accurate or not. But we were trying to make the kind of distinction between someone who identifies with that, and of course, we talk about Nazi today. Nazi fascist isn't interchangeable. Obviously, back in the 1930s, they were quite distinct ideologies. Had many similarities, but there were some differences between.
But these are still white supremacists. Supremacists.
Yeah.
Who follow an ideology inspired by the Nazi party with a capital A.
Yeah, and believe that it was wrong that Britain went to war, believe in the superiority of kind of one race over another, in their case the kind of white race. So they generally follow that.
What's been the personal cost to pursuing this career for you?
Well, I mean, as I say, I've been in this 35 years and I probably not know much else, but clearly for me, I personally have been targeted. There's kind of two people in prison now who've been, one who ended up was getting obsessed with myself and a colleague, was getting home addresses, was trying to swat us. And if people don't know what swatting means, that's ringing up the police saying that, so just to give you a bit, so that's the leader of the National Front who's standing outside, so outside the building.
We do have security. Everyone will be fine.
No, I mean, so, there are people who've gone to prison for making serious threats to me or trying to carry out certain threats. My house, my family have been targeted. We've had Tommy Robinson confront us at the house, had, over the years been attacked. And I've got some of my colleagues here today, and I think, I just want to put on record, it's like, partly myself, but I mean, what we do and the work, the bravery of my colleagues is just incredible. And I think that sometimes it's hard to explain. It's not, I mean, the threats are one thing, and the online abuse is, I mean, it's just constant. I don't look at that anymore and I ignore it. I get so much of it. But, for some of our team, it's tough. You're getting you're getting people saying they're going to rape you, they're going to kill you, they're going to do this, do that. You get confronted in the street. It is tough, but I'm really lucky that there's a group of people who, both now and people who've been with us on this journey, who are really committed and have kind of, been willing to accept some of the risks to that.
And it's worth it.
There are days where it feels a lot harder than other days, and I think, and in a way, I think that's one of the reasons why now seemed to be the right time to write the book. I think for a lot of people, I mean, you started with the Tommy Robinson demo, and I think that for a lot of people, because of what's happened this summer, and the hotel protest, the flags, the Tommy Robinson demo, I think a lot of people are feeling quite demoralised. A lot of people feeling fearful. There are people, black and brown people are really getting scared now, and we're hearing stories, both, the rise of racist attacks. I was talking to the Citizens Advice Bureau the other day. So I think we're looking at, we're entering a really tough phase. Obviously, reform are topping the polls. People are talking about reform being the next government. They're talking about deporting, 1 million plus people. So is it worth it? There are times where it gets tough, but actually for me, it's actually these tough times that make, I think, our work and the work of the people that we work with around the country even more important.
You've had some big results. I mean, you've had some big successes. And probably, is it over the top to say saved lives along the way? Yeah,
I mean, I think, there have been political successes. There's also been kind of, as you say, I mean, there's a whole number of people who've been convicted of terrorism because of what we've done. I mean, on a political level, you look at things like Barking and Dagenham, which, you know, back in 2010, there was a real chance that the British National Party was going to win control of Barking Dagenham Council. The previous elections in 2006, they had averaged 41% of the vote in the wards they had contested, winning 12 out of 13. And, you know, it was a £200 million a year budget. And we ran a campaign at a time when obviously it was the kind of final days of the Labour government. People again were quite disillusioned. But we ran a campaign that we delivered 355,000 pieces of literature in 3 months across that borough. I mean, it's phenomenal. Over 1,500 people got involved in that campaign. So you've had things like that. And then more recently, I don't know if people saw the ITV drama The Walk-In, which was based on a true story about a young lad who was in a group called National Action, was in a group called National Action that had recently been prescribed by the Home Secretary as a terrorist group. And he came to us and coming to the view that he was either going to get killed or he was going to go to prison for a lot of years if he stayed inside the group. And within a few weeks, he told us about a plot to kill a Labour MP, which was days away from happening. Kill a Labour MP and kill a police officer. I mean, interesting kind of parallels to, sadly, what happened in Manchester, because he was on bail for child pornography. And, you know, I mean, he was a long-time Nazi, he was, you know, hardline Nazi. I think he didn't want to be remembered as the person who got done for child, you know, to go to prison for that. So he wanted to go out in a blaze of glory, and he had a dummy vest. He wanted basically to be killed by police. But our information saved the MP's life because the police had no intelligence of the group. So, you know, there are some kind of, I mean, I think over the years there's been about 20 people who've been convicted of terrorism based on our information. And actually I start the book by talking about a young lad who approached me earlier this year, and he was convicted when he was 15 years old during COVID. And, you know, he got radicalised literally in 2 months. And from the time that, you know, it was George Floyd's murder, while most people were obviously thinking about, you know, the racist attack and about race in society, he went the other way. And within 2 months, he was kind of plotting or discussing terrorist attacks. And one of the things that was really kind of, to me, was really interesting from chatting to him. And at first he really hated us because obviously we were inside the group and we exposed the group, and he got convicted as a result. But part of the thing he said to me years later, this year, he basically said we actually saved his life because he was so radicalised, he didn't know where he was going to go. But one of the things he said, which I thought was really interesting, he just said, you know, being involved in the far right was so much fun. They talked about empowering people, whereas the left just lectured people, you know, you can't think this or you must think that. And, you know, for a teenage boy at that time, it was, you know, it was things like that, you know, are always quite important to understand and listen to.
It doesn't sound that much fun, but the thing we've touched on a few times is young men here. It's an almost uniquely male phenomenon. And you talk in the book about the types of men who are groomed and the phenomenon of grooming and this sort of emergent incel phenomenon as well. How do we reach young disaffected men? How do we change this narrative for the men in our society who go this way?
I mean, look, I think that, like much of the book, there is no simple solution to anything, and actually the solution has to happen on many different levels. I think that part of it, and, you know, partly you've got to look at the role of the internet, and, you know, and you've got to look at kind of masculinity and how that plays out and who their peers are, etc. But one of the things I kind of look at in the book is the decline in youth services, decline in youth clubs, and decline in places where people can go. Now, that in itself isn't going to stop it at all, but it's about interventions that isn't top down. And I think that one of the things that concerns me is that when many people look at, I mean, let's say take Prevent, for example, which is obviously contentious for a whole number of issues, but...
This, in case you're not familiar, Prevent is the national counter-extremism programme that you'd be put onto if you were at risk of radicalisation.
But see, I mean, obviously it's kind of police-led, and it's about, realistically, it's about stopping violence, and it's not necessarily about helping the people who kind of go through it. And there's a real problem that schools, if they have a statutory obligation to report people to prevent if they display certain behaviours or say or do certain things. But as I say, the young people themselves don't necessarily get helped in that process, and you end up criminalising them, but also you need a better intervention to work with young people. And you know, one of the things in the book, I go to there's a youth centre in Hull. I've never seen a project like it. It's just the most unbelievable place called the Warren in Hull. And you know, 12 to 1,500 young people a month go through their doors, and the services that they offer and the space. And I think part of it's about giving young people the chance to be young people, but also allowing them to think about some of the solutions and involving them. And I mean, when we did, in part of the book, I talk about some of the Hope Not Hate campaigns that we've done over the years, and the Hope Not Hate bus that we used to do with the Daily Mirror. One of the best projects that we ever, the areas that we used to try was boxing, because you tended to find a lot of boxing coaches were first of all deeply embedded in communities, but actually yes, they were boxing coaches, but they were also community people. And I kind of went to college, and I lived in Sheffield for a long time, where there was a boxing gym in Sheffield, you know, fantastic bloke who ran it, and he had one of the world champions. He had Johnny Nelson, and when there were kids who were kind of playing truant at school or getting into trouble, he and Johnny Nelson would go round to see the family. You know, he would take a world champion boxer with him, and just, you know, the bloke's name was Brendan Ingle, unbelievable coach. But you know, and it was just a way to try to engage with young people, with people that they respected, that wasn't people sneering at them or telling them off or whatever. So I kind of think that we need to approach young people slightly differently, and I think we need to give them some agency as well.
And that sense of identity and maybe some fun, that, you know, that they apparently get when they join our friend outside. So this is the grassroots picture. I was struck at the top of the book with the list of countries that you kind of reeled off that were now, you know, led or heavily influenced at the, you know, governmental level by the far right. How do we affect that picture? You know, I think you listed the US, Austria, Hungary. There were others, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And I mean, I think that it's easy to think that what we are seeing here or we're witnessing is unique or it's somehow different, and clearly it isn't. And I think that some of the drivers for it are clearly happening in many other countries: deindustrialisation, the impact of globalisation, impact of migration, climate change. All these things are having an impact. It's funny, actually, when we were talking in the room at the back, I was talking about an interview I did where someone said to me, you say in the book that we need to take a leaf out the far right's playbook. And I was in this interview and I couldn't remember where in the book I said this or what I was referring to. But it was actually this, because I think that, you know, we on the kind of progressive side of politics always like to think that, you know, we're the internationalists, we care, we've got all these international links, we look at things in a far broader context. Well, actually, the far right have been doing that over the last few years, probably far more effectively, because it's not just about solidarity, what they do. It's about ideas, it's about money, it's about networks, it's about, you know, I mean, you have every year, you have this thing called the ARC conference in London, 5,000 people, and it's the main kind of right-wing conservative gathering in the world. And, you know, they've got ideas and they've got, as I say, really well resourced. And I think that we don't on our side of the street, you know, I mean, in the sense of, I think because of English nationalism and because of the war, and because of our electoral system, we were late to the party, in a sense. So we've had the kind of rise of the far right in France and Austria, a number of other countries for a number of years, and Britain is in a way stood alone. But it's catching up. But, you know, part of it is about how do how do we deal with globalization? Because in the book, one of the things I go through in quite detail when we talk about the immigration debate, because one of the things I was saying, look, yes, people want control. People want to feel that they know who's coming in to the country, and that people who shouldn't be coming in, shouldn't be here. But actually, where most British people are is in a far better position on it. Though you wouldn't believe that if you listen to the kind of the political debate or social media debate. But what I say in the book is that you can't solve this issue without solving some of the underlying tensions, which is economic insecurity and economic pessimism. So we've looked at attitudes to immigration down to output area level. So that's 160 houses. So the areas with the most hostile attitudes to immigration are the places where they've got some of the highest levels of multiple deprivation, but also the greatest levels of collapse of social capital, the glue that held communities together. And so, one of the things I'm saying in the book, and I think this is a problem certainly across Europe, certainly in North America, that you're not going to solve issues like immigration without addressing the underlying causes that create anxiety. And a lot of that is economic. So I think that we need to work more internationally to think up answers, because of course, in this kind of global world, it's hard to one country to buck the trend because of social media and all the rest of it. So I think that we need to be much better at working together and providing answers, because I think that part of the problem, whether it's globalization, whether it's cost of living crisis, all these major things, the kind of progressive side of politics has actually failed to have answers for ordinary kind of working class people.
The thing that really obviously struck a lot of people, and I ended up writing about, was that Elon Musk appeared on a screen on Whitehall in front of a huge crowd of people outside the seat of power in this country. Why is there so much money? Why are the super rich and the wealthy seemingly so comfortable with this style of politics, do you think? Big question.
Big question. And there's probably no simple answer again, but no, I think, you've got different groups of people. So, for example, you will have Meta, Zuckerberg, who, has done somersaults over the last few years, from being a liberal a couple of years, 3 or 4 years ago, to now he wants to be Trump's best mate. And they're changing the algorithms, they're changing the moderation, they are doing everything to kind of curry favour with people like Trump and everything. So they're allowing all this to happen to kind of protect their profit. Then you've got people like Musk, Peter Thiel, some of these others who are doing it ideologically. And it's not simply that, they believe in kind of far-right ideas or anti-immigration ideas, because actually, if you look at some of the issues in the US, some of the battles between like Elon Musk and what they would call kind of MAGA world is over immigration and visas or whatever, but they have this view of themselves as superior people. They literally do believe that they are better people, and and it's tied in with Christian nationalism. So we've seen, Peter Thiel fits into this, we've seen this Christian nationalism coming in as well, where they are using their money for kind of political kind of reasons. And I think one of the big trends we're starting to see in the UK is this Christian nationalist money that's coming in. That's huge. We're talking about millions are coming in, both in the kind of single issues like abortion and played out in the right to life, but also in terms of funding a lot of this kind of right-wing ecosystem.
You end the book on a very, very hopeful note. I write about this stuff on a regular basis, and I have done for a very long time. I struggle sometimes. Why should we be hopeful, and what should we do?
Well, so I think that we should be hopeful in the sense of where the majority of British people are on a whole range of issues, are in a far better place than you would imagine from the political discourse, or certainly from the social media discourse. And so the vast majority of British people want a sensible immigration policy. The vast majority of people do not want their communities burning. The vast majority of people are happy living and mixing with people of different ethnicities and religious backgrounds. The vast majority of people want the government to do more to make cohesion work. And I think in the final kind of few chapters of the book, I really look at some of the kind of, I think, quite inspiring people who are doing amazing things, I think, against the odds in some of these communities. And I think that actually, when we look at what's happening on the ground, there are amazing people doing amazing things that we need to support. So my hope is that, we need to be a lot braver. I was very critical of the government over the summer for their absolute silence and their lack of leadership when we had the hotel protests and the flags and the Tommy Robinson demo, where there was a rise of racism. We needed to stand up, not just say violence is wrong or it's not British or whatever, but the fundamentals of Britain's multicultural society is now under threat like it never has been before, or at least since the 1970s. But I also think that the threat provides an opportunity, because I think that there are concepts, there are ideas, there's a value system that we need to harness and we need to advance that's actually supported by the majority of British people. And I think the answer is in communities, and I talk about a few of them there. And I'll just give you an example of a couple of them. In Burnley, the poorest estate in Burnley, the Stoops estate, which in the 1990s was the 14th poorest, what they called lower super output area of the country. And it's desolate. When I used to visit there in the early 2000s, literally you'd get streets of boarded up housing. Houses would be going for £1,000. There was nothing except for this community centre, community and youth centre. And yet there was no doctor surgeries, no church, there was no nothing. Yet when the BNP were the official opposition on Burnley Council, the one working class ward they never secured was this particular ward. And I genuinely believe it was because there was this community centre which was literally the hub of the community. It did amazing things, led by this really inspirational bloke who's now almost 70 years old, and he's still there in a voluntary capacity. And he is literally, because of the then Conservative County Council, they kind of closed all the youth centres, and him and a couple of others took it over on the basis that they would have to pay for all the repairs and stuff like that. But it just showed what people can do if given resources, given support. And so I genuinely believe that on a national level, there is a value system that the majority of people support, but we need to be bold, and we need to be brave, and we need to be confident to articulate that. But at the same time, at a local level, given resources, the vast majority of people want their communities to work. They want it to be better. And I think that we need to invest in our communities far more than we are doing now. And it's not just about jobs, but it's about the glue that holds those communities together. But also, I think at a national level, we need to defend our Britain. And I think the vast majority of people are with us on this.
Okay, I think we are about halfway through, which is when I promised that you guys would get time to ask some questions. So if you'd raise your hands, please, thank you. And Lily's coming around with a microphone, so this chap here.
Hello, thank you very much. There's been quite a lot of evidence recently that Tommy Robinson and Nigel Farage are starting to take on some kind of Christian nationalist kind of rhetoric, particularly around abortion, etc. How far do you think that's true? And are we starting to see the kind of importation of a more kind of Americanized version of the far right?
Do you want to take a few, or try answering individually?
I'm going to leave most of them to you, but I will.
No, do you want to take a few questions together?
Oh, take a few questions.
Sorry,
I was like, why would I answer that?
I'm going straight back. Yeah.
How do you want to do it, Lily?
Yeah.
Let's do one at a time.
Yeah, no, so I think it is. I mean, I think you've got, again, different levels. You've got the kind of you've got some people using Christian imagery, like Britain First have done for several years. And it's part, they've used it as part of their identity and a part of their kind of political actions. You are clearly getting extreme elements of Christianity moving into the far right, or at least finding an alliance with it. I think what also, and I've got a chapter on the book about this, I think what's also happening though, and that's where some of the Tommy Robinson stuff, so some of the people on this platform, for example, are kind of really extreme and quite ostracized kind of Christian leaders who have very little kind of following and are the kind of real kind of anti-Muslim lot, and whether and then things like abortion. I think the other thing that's happening, and I think it's this cocktail which is really dangerous. You're also seeing a radicalization or a move to the right in many of the mainstream Christian denominations as well. So, for example, in the Church of England, has always been certainly for the last kind of 20 odd years, at the forefront of interfaith work, in the forefront of kind of racial justice. It's been pulling back from that, partly because it's been preoccupied with certain scandals, etc. But also it's facing internal pressure against some of this now, and there is emerging kind of Anglican, both congregations and leaders who are kind of playing the culture war stuff, be it about gay rights, be it about abortion, etc. On the other side, particularly on the Catholic side, you've seen the rise of what we call post-liberalism. So J.D. Vance is a clear example of this, where this kind of, particularly coming from the US, but quite big over here as well, this kind of view that that liberalism is the cause of our problems, and with that is it's combining the kind of the weaknesses, inherent weaknesses of liberalism, with appeasing Islam, and it's this kind of ideas that we saw kind of on the fringes of the kind of counter-jihad movement 20-30 years ago, the anti-Muslim movement, are now quite mainstream in some of these Catholic thoughts. And with J.D. Vance coming in, who's a firm believer in this, you're getting a big rise, and that's where a lot of the money is coming in. And so you're seeing this merging of kind of fairly mainstream Christian thought, that shifting right wing with more extreme forces, and I think it's dangerous. So it's I suppose what I'm saying is we shouldn't just see it as people kind of appropriating Christian symbols for their political beliefs, many of them believing it, but the audience is far bigger, and that's a real worry, I think.
Thanks, Nick. Paul Atherton, I'm a creative social campaigner. One of the things that you mentioned was this sort of acceptance by the mainstream that now we're talking about certain things that we would have perceived as being exceedingly far right 20, 30 years ago today. But I'm curious, do you see mainstream media that kind of, one of the big complaints say about Nigel Farage, he gets so much profile on so many platforms, including the BBC, when he actually doesn't have a significant influence within a political sphere to gain that platform. Can we address mainstream media in respect to putting a better balance on things, or have we just got to ignore it?
Well, look, I mean, I think things like Question Time, we should certainly, call them to account. Now, I remember going back to 2009 when Nick Griffin was on Question Time. Many people probably remember that. Now, that was probably, many people say that was part of his undoing. He looked stupid, he just looked daft. But I remember a friend of mine worked at the TV company that made Question Time. And he said to me after, he said that they deliberately got him on because he was provocative, and at that time it was the biggest ever ratings that they ever got. So we've always got that. So while I think it is important to challenge the right are really good. Often they go on about the BBC and impartiality and stuff like that, where they're on it all the time. At the same time, I don't think that should be our only tactic. I think, and because I think that one of the main things that the far right have done over the last few years is that they have this ecosystem, this kind of media ecosystem that's broad-based, and it's got, you know, newspapers, it's got magazines, it's got GB News, but it's also got podcasts, Substacks, YouTubes, and all the rest, X, and all the rest of it. And so you're getting all this kind of right-wing stuff getting all the time. So it's not just the mainstream media, or as the far right will call it, the legacy media. And so I think that while, yes, we should push back at how much airtime people are getting, at the same time, I do think that we need to figure out how do we use new media platforms more effectively, because to be honest, the far right are far more effective at using it than the progressive side of the street, and that goes back to young people. It's, you know, going back to, it's far more fun, and I think that we are way behind, because the other thing that they've done, they've monetarized hate in a way, and they're all earning good money out of it as well. So I think that, yes, we need to hold particularly the kind of national broadcasters like the BBC to account, but the real work has to be creating alternative platforms that's entertaining and interesting, that people can kind of get their news and politics from.
Hi, thank you so much. I actually work on countering the far right internationally, so this has been a really helpful and interesting conversation. I guess I just wanted to pick up on what you said around the austerity measures and how that has impacted sort of far right recruitment, and also what you said about Labour's response to, or the government's response to, the race riots last summer. And it seems that Labour are trying actually to sort of outright the right rather than look for this alternative. And I'm curious as to whether you understand why they might be doing that, and the risks involved with that strategy, and how we could potentially push them to do better given their majority, given the risks of reform and the sort of limitations of these sort of newer parties in this current moment.
I mean, I think that I think a number of things have been happening at the same time. I mean, so let's start before the riots. Labour came into government without a cohesion strategy. Absolute fact. You know, we'd had many years of the Tories where they were not interested in cohesion. We had levelling up, and then under Michael Gove we had the kind of deliberate destruction of kind of cohesion, interfaith, all the rest of it. Labour came in without a cohesion strategy. Then the riots happened and they scrambled around, and a year on they still do not have a cohesion strategy. So one of the problems is they still don't quite understand, they still don't know what they're doing in terms of different communities and how, you know, and what's the issue, what's the balance between how do people get along together with the underlying economic issues. So I think that's what, policy level, that's one major problem. Politically, Labour has decided that that reform posed a massive risk to their voting base, and that they needed to be really tough on immigration. Now, that's a failed strategy for a whole number of reasons. Forget about the moral argument for now. First of all, the reality is, whether you like it or not, the Labour coalition is a progressive coalition. The overwhelming number of Labour voters are, you know, very kind of positive about immigration, very positive about cohesion, and I'll give you a good example of this. So after Keir Starmer's Island of Strangers speech in May, Labour went down in the polls. There was no movement from Reform back to Labour, but Labour lost 3 points to more to parties on the left, or more progressive parties on immigration. So A, it's a vote loser, B, morally it is wrong, and C, politically it is wrong, because it's trying to chase a vote that Labour will not get back on the question of immigration, but also for many of those voters, immigration is just the issue that their frustrations are articulated through. And it's the loss of hope, it's the economic pessimism that's driving it. So Labour can have whatever policy they want on immigration, and it's not going to make one bit of difference to many of these voters. And I think that, and again, you're chasing down a very narrow group of voters who hate you anyway, and have broken with you for a whole variety of other reasons. Whereas actually, and as I go through really clearly in the book, there is a majority of people who are much more prepared for a more nuanced and balanced position on immigration. You know, yes, we've got to figure out about how many people can Britain have in and how we integrate people. But at the same time, we're complaining about an ageing economy. There's, you know, I mean, last week the Royal College of Nurses were saying that if Labour carry out its plans around visas, we're going to have real problems in the NHS and in adult social care. And you can't have it both ways. You can't say that NHS is really important and then do something that's going to kind of strip hospitals of, you know, a big chunk of their workforce. And I think, but I also think just, again, on the moral thing, it's like, the Labour Party speak about immigration or immigrants as though it's a dirty word. And I'll tell you what, on the Island of Strangers speech, everyone zeroed in Island of Strangers because the echo with Enoch Powell. That wasn't the speech, that wasn't the line that really upset people. There was another line about the incalculable damage that immigration has done. And I know many people who are kind of sons and daughters of people who came in the 70s and 80s who said, that's us he's talking about. People who've worked all their lives, paid taxes, played by the rules, all the rest of it, and he said, they're talking about us and we'll never vote for him again. And I really think that, you know, we've got to do something different, because all we're doing is adding credibility to people who say immigration's the only issue in town. And now we've got a position where you've got Reform basically saying, so I went on a bit of a rant about this because it pisses me off, but Reform are basically saying that they will deport 600,000 minimum who supposed kind of, you know, illegals, undocumented, including women to Afghanistan. You know, that's going to end up well, isn't it? But you know what I mean. But you've got that, and what do Labour do? Labour issue a tweet or post on X, which said, he's a moaner and he's a talker. We're the doers. We've kicked out 35,000 people. Sorry, there's a bankruptcy in, you know. Anyway, it annoys me.
Sorry. Good question.
Can I ask you to say a bit more about where we draw the boundary lines? I mean, after the Tommy Robinson thing, I had an argument with my nephew about, because he said, we've just seen 110,000 fascists out there. We were in a meeting round the corner. And I'm not against using the term fascist, but I didn't agree that you call anyone who turns up to that march fascist. And I think it's quite an important issue because how are you going to split people away from the genuine ultras? And I think if we're too ready to label huge numbers of people because they turn up to a march or for other reasons, there are real risks there. So I'm genuinely sort of puzzled, or would like to hear more about where you think you actually draw a line.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think. Look, I mean, clearly you did not have 110, 150, 200, whatever it was. You didn't have 150,000 fascists on the streets. That wasn't the case. And I think that's really important. I also think that there is a difference between someone who goes on the march because maybe their friends do or they feel strongly in an issue, and the people behind it on the stage or whatever. So when we were fighting the BNP, and of course there are always exceptions to this, but when we were fighting the BNP, we always used to say, you've got to separate out the people voting for them, who might be voting for them for a whole load of reasons. Some of it could be racism, but for a whole load of other reasons. And those, then the members and the activists and the candidates who politically they know what they're signed up with. And, you know, and I think that's not only is it about being accurate, but also we've got to find a way to reach out to some of these people. Because we have to we have to speak with some respect. And also just using the word fascist, all you're doing is pushing people into a camp. And in the book, I talk about a case which is about grooming. And I talk about an incident up in Rotherham back in about 2012. And there was, the EDL had I think there was 15 demos, EDL, Britain First, etc., demos around the issue of grooming in Rotherham, between 2012 and 2015. And there was one particular demo where there was a coach load of principally men, not exclusively, principally men from Maltby, which is 7 miles outside Rotherham, which was an old pit village. That was one of the most loyalist, strongest areas of the strike. And one of their daughters had been abused. And they were angry at the council and their Labour Party, that they said had let down their daughter. And they wanted to show their anger, but they also didn't quite like the EDL because they saw them as far right. So they marched at the back of the demo, but with a distance between them and the other people marching. And as they were coming through Rotherham, people were just shouting Nazi scum at them, right? Now, some of the people, first of all, many of them had been through the strike for a year. Some of them had been active with us against the BNP. And we spoke to them. We met up with a few of them after because we were shocked to see some of these people on there. And we were just saying, look, why are you on there, whatever. And they were so outraged by being called Nazis and fascists. They thought, right, if that's what you think we are, they quickened up and they joined the demo. And I think it was just a really clear example that, words have meaning, you know what I mean? And I think that, Tommy Robinson, I mean, this is horrendous stats, but 37% of men, we've just done a poll of 45,000 people, probably the largest poll ever. 37% of men between 25 and 34 like Tommy Robinson. It's phenomenal. And I think we have to be really careful about just writing off huge groups of people. We might not like what they say, we might not like what they do, and there are some of them we won't entertain at all. But actually a lot of these people are ordinary people, and the moment we start pushing them further away from us, it's going to make our job a lot harder.
I'd add, having been at this march, that a lot of the people that I spoke to truly believed that they were there for good reasons, and one of the big things, one of the big talking points was, we want to protect our children. I don't know if you want to say a little bit about the kind of, we haven't really touched on anti-Islam and the talking points there. I do also don't want to take up too much of the audience's questions time, but
I mean, I think there's probably two issues here. I mean, obviously, anti-Islam is until the last couple of years, where kind of immigration has become really key again. The anti-Islam stuff was a really deep kind of vein running through the far-right narrative, and now it's linked up with immigration because it's about fighting aged men, it's about terrorists, it's about groomers, sexual abusers, or whatever. I mean, I've got a chapter in the book. I've been consistently outspoken on, for example, the grooming issue. I don't understand why we've got ourselves into such a difficult position on it, because for me, grooming's wrong. You know what I mean? But we've ended up, because we're so worried about what, we don't want to be, pander to the kind of far right narrative or whatever, that we've allowed them to take over the agenda, and we've allowed them to dominate it. And I think that we can stand up against racism, stand up against Islamophobia, and also stand up against other things that are just clearly wrong. And the bottom line is, we've got to think about the person who's been abused. We've got to put them front and centre. And I think, to be honest, the kind of progressive world hasn't done that for too long, and we've now got ourselves into an awful situation on it. But I think on the Islam thing, I mean, what I would say, and I mean, it'd be interesting what you've heard. 20 years ago, there was this really fringe idea about civil war. Civil war's coming, and it was the anti-Islam lot, because they wanted civil war, because to them that was the only way they could get Muslims out of Europe. So, you've got one group of people say, oh my God, it's really awful, Britain's going to descend into civil war because communities can't live together. A second group saying, Britain's going to end up in civil war, we don't like it, but we've got to prepare for it. And then the third lot, which Tommy Robinson fitted into, is that actually civil war's good because that's the only way we're going to be able to get rid of these people. What was a fringe idea 20 years ago is quite a mainstream idea now, to the point that in the Daily Telegraph we've had 2 articles in the last 6 months about is civil war coming. There is this narrative on the right that there is going to be this clash of communities. Now, you know, a friend of mine contacted me one evening, oh my God, we need an answer, well, you know, what do we do? And you know, it's quite simple. And I kind of say, look, if you do not want a civil war, if you do not want communities battling it out of each other, we all have to step up. Yes, we need the government to do something, we need this, you know, other people, but it's all about us as well, because we've all got agency, we've all got power, whether it's with our friends, whether we're in community groups, whether we're in, you know, political parties, whatever it is, we've all got agency. And I think that if we do not want their vision of society to win, the only thing, we can't rely on anyone else, it's going to have to be us stepping up to stop them.
Yeah, out on the Epping Hotel, when that was all kicking off, I was talking to people locally, and one guy said, I think we put it in the paper, he said, now I don't believe it, but I've heard that these fighting age men who are coming over here have caches of weapons in shipping containers dotted around the country, and it's as absurd as it is worrying, right? Because people truly believe these things. Anyway, please, let's... One more, yeah? All right, last one.
I was going to ask a question similar to this before, but I think ties in. So around that kind of like, what can we do? We've talked about young people quite a bit, but a lot of people I'm speaking to are quite worried about their parents. So the generation in their 60s, 70s, about them being kind of lured by reform, parroting a lot of the stories that they're seeing, not only from mainstream legacy media, but also on social media. And do you have any tips in terms of what we can say to people to try and, not? So a lot of people are going, I'm disengaging because we've been there around this division, and I don't want to be there, but I know it's wrong, and I want to say something. How do we
de-radicalise our parents?
Yeah. Well, can I just say one of the things, and again, I've got it in the book, but one of the things that there is this, I think, a fallacy that kind of young people are all going to the far right. That is not true. Some are, but it's still way less. Generally, young people in the UK are still overwhelmingly open-minded, tolerant, liberal, progressive, etc. And that's quite different from many countries across Europe, where it's the young people who are voting for the far right and the older people who are not. But age is a massive thing. So actually, the demographics of the reform voter, whatever, is the older people. I kind of think that part of the discussion has to be very personal, yeah? Because I think that, it's about you, it's about your children, it's about young people today, young people speaking to their parents or their grandparents about their futures. I think that's quite powerful. And there was some stuff done in which, until you've raised it, I hadn't really thought much about it, but I remember there was some stuff done in the US election a few years ago, a couple of elections ago, where there was a real effort for young people to speak to their parents and their grandparents, particularly in Florida. And I think that, some of the big political issues, because obviously a lot of older people, it's about change. It's about their Britain's gone, their best days are behind us. But actually, I think that a really powerful thing is children and grandchildren, about opportunities. Who is going to be able to provide? What type of society is going to offer their grandchildren or their children a better future? And the reason I say that, because the reason we chose the word hope not hate back in 2004, we'd done a piece of work, who was voting for the BNP, who wasn't voting for the BNP. And as you won't be surprised to hear, the BNP was an overwhelmingly male vote. But it wasn't that women, and particularly women between 25 and 50, 55, it wasn't that they were kind of more anti-racist and more in favour of immigration, but they were more concerned about the impact of the far right in their communities, and particularly on their kids. And I think that, this is a really powerful kind of tool about your kids' future. And I think young people talking to their grandparents, not on big political issues, because I don't think that will work, but talking to them about, well, my future is better. You know, it's like we talk about Brexit or whatever. Where is your, you know, where is, you know, I think making it more personal is going to be really important.
Okay, that's all the time we have. Thank you for joining us this evening, both online and in person. We look forward to seeing you at the next Observer Book Club. And if you would join me in thanking our guest, Nick Lowles.
The Observer.